Welcome to my video. Today, we're going to be disassembling a laptop computer and seeing all the stuff that's inside it. Before we get started, it's very important to have a nice, good, organized work area. If you're working on the floor, make sure it's very thin carpet or hardwood so that screws won't fall into it, like if they drop by accident. If you're working on a table, make sure it's big enough so that screws won't roll off, and maybe even have a tray for containment. Also, have a good number of tools and have them all handy. I have a magnetic screwdriver, a flathead screwdriver, a non-magnetic but bigger Phillips head screwdriver, some tweezers, and a 5-in-1, which is useful for prying. I also have this paper bowl for putting in screws and small objects so they don't get lost. And, of course, the computer. So let's get started. I'll unscrew the screws. So when you're undoing screws, there's a technique that you want to use. First of all, make sure the screwdriver is in the screw. You can just kind of feel it click in place. Then, while pushing down hard, turn it to the left until you feel the screw loosen, and then you can just kind of spin it for a while until you feel it come out. And then, just either use the magnetic screwdriver to pull it out, or flip the laptop over and put your hand under the screw hole. So now I'm just going to do the rest of them at a ridiculously fast speed. Let's start with the hard drive, the device that stores all the data on your computers, like documents, photos, videos, operating systems, everything. It comes out of this little compartment on the side of the computer. It has this metal piece that holds it in place and helps attach it to this black piece, which helps it like blend into the side of the computer, because you don't want just like a big metal thing sticking out. That would be kind of weird looking. So the hard drive has two main internal pieces. There's the disk, which spins really fast, 5,400 RPMs to be exact on this drive, and it's magnetic. And there's also this arm that can move back and forth so that the tip of it can be over any part of the spinning magnetic disk. On the arm, there's magnetic read and write heads that can read and magnetize tiny little chunks of this disk, which work as ones and zeros. And using like bajillions of these tiny little magnetic sections, it can store lots of data. This one is pretty old, and it can store 320 gigabytes. So that's the hard drive. Now for the disk drive. That comes out of a similar compartment on the other side of the computer, like this. It's a bit bigger, obviously big enough to hold a CD or a DVD. It has contacts back here. That's where it attaches to the motherboard, which is a similar location as the hard drive. It has this button on the front that lets you pop it open. Let's see, it says DVD multi-recorder. That means it can record DVDs. DVD rewritable. That means it can, well, record DVDs, I guess. And compact disc writable, which is for CDs. So the inside of this is sort of similar to the hard drive, except instead of an arm, it has like a slider thing. And that pretty much, other than that, it's the same as the hard drive, except it uses light instead of magnetism. So that's the CD-DVD drive. Next, we've got the battery. The battery can pop out of this compartment on the back. You just need to pull this little switch thing and pull it out. And there are the contacts. It's got a bunch of little pins that fit into the battery, and there they are on the computer. And so this is a 10.8 volt battery with a capacity of 48 watts. And this is actually really big and fat for a computer battery. Most modern ones are way smaller. So now we're going to finally see what you probably think of when you think of an inside of a computer. Lots of green boards with lots of weird electronic-y stuff on it. We can use the 5-in-1 to pull this thing off. And ta-da, there it is. So that thing right there is the Wi-Fi adapter. It's a very tiny chip. It amazed me when I first saw it how small it was. It's connected to these two wires, which are antennas. They go to the top of the computer so that it can get better reception. But if we just pop these off, like that, and I'll undo this screw real quick, we can just pop it out. And there it is, the Wi-Fi card. Connects using those pins, and that's the back. So now let's do the RAM. RAM is a very important part of the computer. It basically stores all of the things that running applications and the operating system are currently using. It comes in sticks that you can pop out by flipping these pins. And it's got lots of tiny little black memory chips on it. And there are the pins where it connects. There's 2 sticks of it. Some computers have a lot more than 2 sticks of it. And yep, that's the RAM. Now for the heatsink. The heatsink is this thing right here, and how it works is a fan is in here, and the fan sucks in air from the back and blows it out through there, which is over the heatsink. And the heat is conducted off of the Northbridge chipset and the CPU, we'll get to those in a minute, goes through this coil and onto that grate, and then is blown off by the fan. So let me just unscrew it here. And man, look at all of that dust. This is a very big problem in laptops. It's the cause of many, many other problems. So that is the heatsink. This chip right here is the CPU, Central Processing Unit. It's like the brain of the computer. Whenever anything needs to be figured out, from what to do when a button or key is pressed to figuring the right website to go to, if you're browsing the web, the CPU has to do it. And now doing all of that work makes it get really hot, and that's why it needs the big heatsink that we just talked about, and this gray stuff, which is called thermal grease, and it helps conduct the heat off of the CPU onto the heatsink. So now I'll give you a general overview of how the CPU works. It has four main parts inside of it: the bus, the ALU, the CU, and the cache. The bus is just a group of wires that connects all the parts of the CPU. Most modern computers, including this one, have 64 wires in the bus, but some older ones had 32, which are still common, and really old ones had 16, 8, or even 4. And each wire can carry one bit at a time. A bit is either 1 or 0, on or off. And this is what people mean when they say 64-bit computer, that the CPU can process 64 bits at a time. Now, the ALU stands for Arithmetic Logic Unit. Its job is to solve math and logic problems. For example, it might need to figure out what's 4 plus 5, or 2 is greater than 5, true or false. And the cache is sort of like RAM for the CPU. This CPU has 1 megabyte of cache, so the cache is really small, considering this computer has 4 gigabytes of RAM. But it can go as fast as the CPU needs it to, which is very fast indeed, which we'll get to in a minute. What the cache does is it stores instructions that are waiting to be processed by the CPU, and it can also store information coming from the CPU waiting to go to the rest of the computer. There's also the control unit, which controls and coordinates the CPU, and by extension, the rest of the computer. It can take incoming data and send it to the ALU for processing, and it can also send outgoing solutions from the ALU and commands for computer parts to the cache and then to the rest of the computer. And finally, there are these tiny little things called registers, which can hold a set of 64 bits on their way from the bus to part of the CPU. And, of course, 32 and 32-bit CPUs, etc. All the functions of the CPU are kept in sync by the clock. The CPU can do one thing on each tick of the clock, and this CPU's clock runs at 2.0 gigahertz, which is 2 trillion ticks per second, which is amazing. Just amazing. And believe it or not, that speed is actually just kind of average for CPUs. The world record is 8.79 gigahertz, which is 8,000 million ticks per second. Wow. Running that fast would make most CPUs like this one catch fire or explode, or at the very least an anticlimactic melting. So instead of increasing clock speed to get better performance, most modern computer manufacturers are increasing the number of cores. A core is like a CPU inside of a CPU. This particular one has 2 cores, and it would be exactly twice as powerful as a comparable single-core CPU. Laptops that are being currently produced in June 2015, which is when I'm making this video, usually have 2 to 8 cores, and the really high-end gaming ones have 16. Supercomputers which have many CPUs linked together, are actually getting close to the triple digits for cores. So yep, that's the CPU. So now it is time for me to remove the palm rest. In part 2, that is. Don't miss it.